is Stacy Denny, and I work in our diversion unit for the juvenile office. So I basically provide preventative services to families. So we get all of our information from law enforcement. So we in the diversion unit can get like police reports, reports from the school, but we also take what we call parental complaint forms. So parents can actually just come into the juvenile office and fill out some information on their own children, and we would contact them and provide some services. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about diversion later in the presentation, but that way you guys kind of know where I am coming from. And this is Shaylee. She works with me in diversion, and she is going to kind of shadow, and I'm probably going to throw her under the bus a little bit to talk a couple of times. Okay, so the juvenile office has a wide range of services that we offer to families. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is our abuse and neglect unit. So this unit is for children that have been abused or neglected by their parents. So in the state of Missouri, we have Children's Division, which a lot of people know from being like DFS, but they are Children's Division. They are part of the social services for the state of Missouri that come in and do investigations on families. If they feel like they need some additional services, they can offer that. If they feel like that child is in real danger from their parents being in that home, they make a referral to the juvenile office. And the juvenile officers that we have that work on abuse and neglect cases do the actual court filings against those parents to assist Children's Division in removing those kids from their homes and placing them into a safe environment. So that can be a resource or a group facility for those kids to go into, as well as foster care, and the end goal being adoption for those kids if their parents have their rights terminated. So our approximate caseload right now is 550 kids that are in state's care here in Greene County. So that actually is a number that has been improved upon by our office. Within the last 2 years, we were averaging really almost 1,000 kids in care most of the time. So we're definitely really proud of those numbers coming down a little bit because that means that we're getting more services to families and not having to take those kids out of their homes, which sometimes can be just as traumatic as what they might be seeing within their own home. So as I talked about, we are looking to make sure that those kids are placed in foster care, that they are being adopted. But the ultimate goal anytime a child is removed from their home is reunification with their parents. So even though a child may be taken out of their home and placed in foster care or a residential facility, those parents are still going to be receiving services and hopefully improving what they would be able to offer in their home to get those kids back and keep those kids within their same family. Okay, so another area that we provide services to families is in our domestic relations unit. So they offer mediations to families. A lot of times that's provided for families when they're going through a divorce. These might be the people that someone would meet with to figure out what their parenting plan is going to look like, to have an amicable divorce between a formerly married couple to try to keep those kids in a good, healthy situation as well. So they're going to help with figuring out child support for both of those parents. As I kind of talked about with the parenting plan, making sure that custody is kind of fair and even and healthy for everyone, as well as assisting with paternity to make sure that we understand who the biological father of a child is going to be. Every once in a while, we have to make sure that we know who the maternal mom is. It's super rare, as you would imagine. It has happened in our office before, though. Common Ground is something that they offer that basically provides supervised visitation. So if a child has been removed from the home, sometimes one of the things that they will decide upon in court is that that child can see their biological parent, but that they don't know if they can be left alone with that parent. So they basically just provide supervision for those visitations and make sure that that child does stay safe while they're seeing that parent. And our alternative dispute resolution is kind of going back to that, making sure that those divorces are amicable between parents. Okay, so in our delinquency unit, that's where we see kids that have committed a crime. So we kind of say on the abuse and neglect side, that's where maybe the parents have done something wrong, and on the delinquency side, that's where the kiddo has done something wrong. So we provide a very wide range of services to kids within our office that fall under this delinquency category. So when they first come in, like I said before, we get all of our reports through law enforcement or the schools, and those are reviewed by an attorney in our office to decide if we have what we call legal sufficiency to have those cases move forward with formal services within our office. So if they're going to have paperwork filed against them in court and have to go in front of a judge and be appointed an attorney to determine if those allegations are true or not. So when they first come in, they're going to meet with one of our juvenile officers, and they are going to do a couple of assessments with them. So they're going to see a risk needs assessment, and that is a form that we have that the officer will actually fill out based on information that they know about the family. Some of those things are if the parents have been incarcerated, if the parents have had substance abuse issues, as well as if the child has had multiple reports with our office, if we know that that child has had substance abuse issues, if we're aware that they haven't been connecting with their peers socially, and some other things like that, that help us to kind of determine where they are at in their need for services from our office. We also have them do something called the MAZE, which is basically like a giant survey that we have kids fill out, and that helps us get a really good assessment of their mental health needs. So that helps us to see, you know, definitely the biggest red flag that we're going to be looking for this test for if a child is having suicidal ideation. So if they're actually thinking about harming themselves or attempting to commit suicide, that's going to be the number one thing that we're looking for, so that we can make sure that that child goes home with a plan to keep them from harming themselves. The type of investigation that our officers do is what we call a social investigation. So they aren't necessarily taking a police report and investigating the facts of the case. So they're not trying to find evidence or get into the details of why the kid committed the crime or anything like that. They are basically trying to figure out if there's something going on in that kid's life that created a need for them to commit this crime, and basically see what's going on in their home life or socially for them to try to provide them with those services to keep them from committing offenses like this again. Let's see. So part of how they do that is through structured interviewing questions. And that's, again, kind of a big survey, but one of our officers kind of verbally assesses a child with this. And that is something that through the state of Missouri is handed down that we have to ask kids when they come into our office. And it kind of helps provide us with these risk needs and kind of understanding socially and family dynamics and things like that. We also do something that is called filing considerations. So there are literally things that we consider when we make a decision if we are going to file court paperwork on that kiddo and have them go in front of a judge. Whenever possible, we try to keep kids from going in front of a judge and really save those for very serious crimes because in the long run, it's better for them to receive those services without going in the courtroom as opposed to us having to mandate it with our judge. So when we are determining their need for services, we create a treatment plan. So that's going through all of these steps that we have already done with a kid and their family and determining what the best services are going to be for that kiddo. So we basically put in there what we think that need is going to be, how we want them to have that need met, and create goals and measurable outcomes to make sure that we are meeting those needs for those families. So kind of the lowest level of services that we offer is in our diversion unit, and that's where I work. So this is going to be for really low level misdemeanors. We get a lot of, like stealing from big department stores, as well as those parental complaint forms that I talked about earlier. We get a lot of parents that are just kind of having issues with their kids at home. They may feel like they're being disrespectful, not following rules, things like that. So we want to see what we can do to help those parents feel like they can get those kids back on the right track that they want them to be on. So this isn't my PowerPoint, so how can we help your family is kind of a big question that I ask when I'm talking to people. So in diversion, we have a little bit wider of a net of services that we can provide. So even though I might be looking at a police report that talks about a kid stealing from Walmart, there may be something else really serious going on that they might need to see a counselor for something specific or deal with some trauma that they have seen in their history. So that's more likely going to be the resource that I'm going to provide to that family.
So if a parent, contacts you about their child, does that usually cause friction? Does the child usually get worse, or have you noticed?
I mean, it really depends. A lot of times it really depends on what's in that parental complaint form. But just because I'm getting that information from the parent doesn't necessarily mean that I'm bringing that kid in and having a conversation with them. So if it feels appropriate, I may get that information from the parent, contact them directly, and talk to them on the phone and provide them with some services to where that kid might not even know that their parent came in and tried to get us involved. Sometimes we do bring the kids in and talk to them about that, and sure, yeah, that can cause some friction within the home. But a lot of times kids are kind of set aback after they come into our office, and they're probably going to have, hopefully, a good conversation with the juvenile officer, so it's not making anything worse. So sure, that's always a possibility.
I think we jumped.
Yeah,
Did we? I'm sorry. Probably a couple. I was chatting, and if I don't click it just right, my bad.
Okay, so yeah, back to probation. If you go back to the slides. One more. There we go.
Okay.
Okay, so kind of the next level of service that we offer to families is placing kids on probation. So we can do this a couple of different ways. Informally, where that kid's not going to go into a courtroom, we offer what's called an informal adjustment. And that requires the families to voluntarily work with our office to get those services for that kid. So they are going to have a probation officer that's assigned to them directly in our office that they're going to meet with regularly. They are going to create that treatment plan for them and help them follow through with all of the goals in that treatment plan. And those services generally last from about 3 to 6 months that we would be working with families. And then kind of the next step up is formal probation. So that means that that kiddo is going to go into a courtroom, be in front of a judge, and they're going to have all of their treatment goals mandated that they have to complete before they're going to be released from supervision. So again, they're going to have a probation officer that they're going to meet with regularly. They're going to see that probation officer quite a bit more than if they were under informal services. And those services generally last from about 6 months to a year. It can last longer if it needs to, but we try not to make it last a whole lot longer than a year because you can kind of get into a scenario where you're just running in circles if you keep that kid under supervision for a really long time.
So can I ask a quick question? So how successful is the informal adjustment? Does that usually? work? I mean, keep kids from.
I mean, of
Coming back
course,
in?
we're going to have kids that are going to
Right,
come back
right.
into
Yeah,
those formal
absolutely, but-
services, but we absolutely have more kids under informal services.
Kind
than
of a
we do
shock
formal.
treatment, and they kind of gets their
Mhm.
attention and they don't come
Mhm.
back, right?
And it also allows those kids and those parents to find some services that they can seek without having to have contact with our office. So the state of Missouri has the most successful juvenile justice system in the entire country. So we believe really wholeheartedly in the services that we're providing. So then kind of the next step up is what we have that's called our Greene County Youth Academy. And we've got a whole slide on that I can talk about in just a minute. But so the kind of contacts that kids are going to have with their probation officers can be office visits where that kid is coming into the juvenile office and making a contact with their officer there. We also go out into the homes and meet with families. So if we see that we've got a family that really struggles with transportation, we can do a lot more home visits with them to make sure that we're checking in with those families, as well as going into the schools. We want to do regular school visits, but we also don't want to have that kid identified by the school and get them targeted. So we definitely weigh kind of how often we go into those schools and see kids. So our Greene County Youth Academy is our highest level of supervision that we offer. It is a day treatment program that we have kids on probation go through. So we have a Springfield Public School in there that the kids come in and sit through school all day. And they also have evening programming that we offer to those kids. And Shaylee helps set up some of that evening programming. So I'm going to let her talk just a little bit more about the Youth Academy.
So statistically, like statistic talking, most kids commit crimes between the hours of 3 and 5. So we keep our kids at GCYA longer than the 3-hour school period that school has. So we'll do things after hours, like we have a movie night, we do cooking groups, art groups. They just started working with Willard and they have I don't remember what PAL stands for exactly. It's like Police Athletic Leadership something. So they go and work with the Willard Police Department and do boxing, just kind of an outlet for them. So we do different things like that. We started doing equine therapy with them too. They're required to go through anger management and do counseling services also. And then any needs that do arise, we can do such as like drug treatment if they're having problems going to the doctor, like they're from a low socioeconomic background. Going to the doctor, we can provide transportation to those and set up those appointments to kind of help the family out.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you remember Bailey School?
Mm-hmm.
Were you associated with that, or was that?
We were not associated with
Okay.
them. We actually tried to get their building though. But yeah, no, they were totally
Well,
separate.
I was just wondering, because I knew it used to exist,
Mhm.
and now it's not, they're doing something else with it, but
Mhm.
I didn't know if you were associated with that program or not, or had
No.
something to do with it. Okay.
They were a Springfield Public School, but we're even like one step removed
Okay.
from them. The schools basically are just nice and give us one of their teachers, and then our kids get credit through
So
the schools.
Do you do it all over there at your juvenile facility?
So we have the main juvenile office where our
Yeah.
detention facility and all of our probation is housed.
All right.
And then we actually work in a building that's just down the street
Okay.
that we have for the Greene County Youth Academy, so they can have school and those evening services in just a different building so that they're a little bit separated from the
Okay.
juvenile office.
Thanks.
So is the Youth Academy, when it says the highest level
Mhm.
of probation supervision, is that for extremely difficult kids, or is that just a level of to get them involved in something else other than?
So it's definitely going to be kids that are struggling a lot more with the services they've already been provided. So, I
it's
mean,
kind of a stepping stone.
exactly.
Start here,
Mhm.
here, and then we'll go to the Youth Academy.
Yep.
Got another question. What if it didn't work out? Are they
If
just shy of being incarcerated, or?
at the Youth Academy, yes. If they can't make it work at the youth academy, the next step for them is to be taken into custody by the Division of Youth Services. And that means that they're going to be placed in a 24-hour residential facility until the state feels like they can release them back into their home.
Okay.
Greene County definitely prides themselves in not sending very many kids to the Division of Youth Services. In other counties where they don't have as many resources as we do, they will send kids to the Division of Youth Services for anything and everything. So the kind of beauty in us having those steps to getting kids into those services is that we're able to be pretty selective with who we feel like can't be in the community.
Is the reason why they do that in other counties because they don't have the
They just don't have the ability to do
personnel and
it.
services to provide those kids?
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
I was so so like there's a youth facility at Mountain Grove.
Mhm.
Is that what you're talking about? Like when you're talking about like the 24-hour 7?
I can't think off the top of my head which one is in Mountain Grove. There is a DYS facility in Mount Vernon.
There's also one in Kabul. Gentry is in Kabul, and it's a Division of Youth Services.
Okay.
And there are other 24-hour facilities that aren't associated with the Division of
Okay.
Youth Services. I mean, there's a lot that are their own private organization, and there's also a lot that are for those kids
This
that
is
are
the Wright County Detention Center or something, maybe is what it's called. Because the probation officers work out of there, I know.
So if that's their detention center, then that's, and we're going to talk about that.
All
That's
right.
that's kind of like our,
A little
our
different
kid
then. Okay.
jail.
There we go. Okay.
So one more. So if a kid commits a crime and needs to be removed from the community immediately, or they are not working under our supervision and do have to go to the Division of Youth Services, they're going to come to our detention facility. So honestly, just for lack of a better term, because they're very different, that is kind of kid jail. So it looks very similar to what a jail looks like. They have big steel locked doors, that they have individual cells that they stay in. We try to make sure that those kids are spending as little time alone in their rooms as possible. Whenever we can offer that to them. So our detention facility also has a really large room that we call our day room, and it's basically a large den where they are able to access services. We have in-house clinicians that can see them to help make sure that their mental health needs are being met. They, have the ability to have access to books, to play some games, and have some staff supervised kind of rec time for them. So our detention facility holds 24 youth. We hardly ever get to a number that big. Our average population is around 7. It can get bigger, it can get smaller. We do have the occasion where you don't have any kids in detention, which is great. I don't know off the top of my head what the average length of stay is. But we do not hold kids in detention for very long. So once a youth is placed into detention, they are going to have what we call a detention hearing for our judge to make a determination for them to be released or not within 72 hours. So they are going to have judicial intervention before they're going to stay there for very long. If they are a huge risk to the community and they have been out committing crimes and we don't feel like it's safe to have them in the community, we will ask for them to be held. But the majority of the time, those kids are going to be released within a day or two of being brought into detention.
So do we only have one judge that deals with judicial issues for kids?
So the juvenile office does have a judge that's assigned to them.
Okay.
However, if for some reason he can't see a case, any of the judges in Greene County can
Okay.
see our cases.
So it's just not one judge, it could be.
It's primarily one judge, but
Okay.
it can be any of them.
Is it Judge Holden? Is it Calvin Holden?
No, it is Judge Hosmer now. Holden
Hosmer.
was ours for a while
Mhm.
though.
Okay.
So some of the things that we use that I've already talked about, the risk to community is something that we consider if we're going to hold a kid in detention. The other thing is we actually use a form called the JDTA form that we literally go through and kind of rank the kids' risks on to give us an objective tool to make a decision if they need to be held or not. So some of the things that are going to be considered on that are the amount of referrals they've had with our office, if they're already under supervision, the severity of the crime that's being presented. And so that way we kind of have a tool that tells us when a kid really needs to be in detention, when they can be released to go back home. Another reason that a kid may stay in detention is if they don't have a custodian or a parent that wants to take them back home. So this is really common with kids. A lot of times when we see domestic assaults, it's against their parents. So a lot of times parents don't feel safe to take that kid back home. We also have just extreme cases where maybe the kid's running away a lot and they have kind of gotten themselves up to that level of need, and once they get into detention, the parents just say, I'm not going to take them home because they're going to run away again. So there's a lot of different reasons that parents might not want to take their kids home, but if we don't have someone to release that kid to, we're just going to keep them in detention until we can make a determination of what's going to happen with that kid. So our office is constantly trying to work on becoming trauma informed, which is an actual measurable status that any organization can reach. One of the steps that you have to take is that every employee in your office has to go through a certain level of trauma training. So that for our office includes our receptionist, our janitorial staff, any staff that's just record staff that's never going to have contact with those kids, but they still need to have that understanding of what we are trying to kind of help and deal with when we're working with these families. So this is kind of changing the mindset of how a lot of people see the criminal justice system, from not what did you do, but what happened to you to make you do that. So kind of really getting into the root cause of what's going on with these kids and trying to treat that as opposed to just the issue that is kind of up front and center. So trauma is anything that impacts a kid and can change their mindset and have them react differently in different situations. So trauma is something that's very different for every single person. It can be something that is ongoing or chronic, and it can also be a one-time event. So, you know, when you're talking about criminal justice, a lot of times people think of, you know, ongoing domestic violence in the home or something like that. But it can also be for kids if they have to move a lot. If parents are having money issues and they are getting evicted from homes a lot, and that kid is seeing a different house all the time, that can be really traumatic because it creates a real level of instability for that kiddo. As well as if there is a natural disaster that kid lives through. So, you know, around here we get tornadoes. If that kid lives through a tornado, that's another really traumatic event that they may need to deal with. And they may be acting out in interesting ways to get attention from their parents to get those needs met. And sometimes kids just can't put into words what they're going through to get those needs met. So we really put a focus on trauma to try to identify what those events are so that we can meet those needs for those kids. So some of the things that we have done in our office is changing the actual physical environment. So we have several of our conference rooms that we have painted different colors and tried to have just kind of a nice atmosphere with just nicer looking tables and a little bit more comfortable chairs, as well as we actually have one specific conference room that is designed for kids that we know are dealing with a lot of trauma. So that room has actually been set up to resemble a living room. So we've got some nice leather chairs, a coffee table, even small things like we have a Scentsy that we keep in there so that we can make sure that that room has kind of a nice pleasant smell because our building is really old and it doesn't always smell super great. We keep the lights kind of low in that room so we don't use these kind of overhead irritating lights. We have several lamps in the room so that we can keep it kind of soft and have warm lighting in there. We have several games, puzzles, some different kind of tactile things for kids to play with. So we've got like push balls and slinkies and stuff like that. Because a lot of times when you're talking about tough things, it's really hard to look someone in the eye and have that conversation. So if you got something that you can kind of mess with, sometimes it's easier to share those things. So we just try to be responsive and aware of things like that as we are continuing to work with kids. Another thing that we use to kind of read that level is something called the ACE study. Have any of you guys talked about the ACE study in here? Okay. I see just one head nodding.
Well,
People not know what it is.
Well, I just have the sheet that.
Okay, okay. So ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Effects. Is that what that is? Experiences, yes. And so it was actually created by a doctor who was studying, I believe, obesity originally, and wanted to see why that was occurring in certain adults. And basically ended up finding out that the vast majority of the people that he was treating were suffering from different childhood experiences that were traumatic for them. So a lot of them had seen sexual abuse or had domestic violence in their home or felt abused or neglected by their parents. And it became a really huge study that is now used all across the country to see what's going on with people. So that's something that our office uses all the time. And even our employees go through and take the ACE studies and things like that. I know the original doctor that created this and did this study said that the average ACE score in his office was like a 4, which automatically puts you in a high risk scenario for health problems, as well as things psychologically and acting out behaviors for kids and things like that.
Is there something different for somebody who's younger? I mean, I could maybe see the wording of this for an older child, but the younger ones, I don't know, might be kind of like.
So when we use the ACE study, we do have one of our staff with them to try to make sure that they understand the questions. But this is not a study that you can take and change the questioning on because it's been so studied and is evidence-based. So we can't really do anything about it. But I do hear what you're saying.
A question, you have kids so violent or that act out where they're going to hurt themselves or potentially hurt others? Do you have a room that's padded or something, or do you have to restrain them at any time over there? Or
we don't have any rooms that are padded. If we do have to restrain a kiddo, we do that.
okay,
It's honestly not something that we come across very often. And if that kiddo is really in such a place that they cannot be out of their cell in detention or something, there may be a decision to keep that kiddo in their cell a little bit more and kind of be more selective of when they are out.
well, I didn't know if you maybe called an ambulance or something and have them committed to a facility that would deal with.
We can,
Okay,
but that's pretty rare that we need to do that.
okay,
Generally, we don't remove a kid from detention unless they are threatening to harm themselves, which really doesn't happen all that often. If that kid does need medical attention, they are absolutely going to get that. If we have a kid that comes into detention and they have a toothache, they're going to get to see a dentist. So if any medical needs that they have, they are going to see those.
yeah, I was just concerned about any psychiatric behaviors that need to be examined. If you guys did it there, or
And we do have clinicians that can
They come
do, we have fully on staff all the
Okay.
time, clinicians that work for us, as well as nurses that we have come into our detention facility, to make sure that we have that assessed,
Okay.
so that we're aware of that with any kids that we're working with. And then I've kind of already talked about our calming room, which is our one specific conference room that we have that looks like a living room. But we also make sure that our kids see music therapy and art therapy within our youth academy, and in our detention facility, they see both of those services.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah, that's
So
it.
did you guys pass out a handout?
No,
or
this
did I
is
miss
what
it?
the pay.
I forwarded all that on to you
Oh,
guys.
okay.
That was, yeah,
Gotcha.
so that you can print them off and
Right,
and
okay.
look at them, put them in your binder.
Any other questions from you guys?
No, so how long have you been?
I started at the youth academy in September, and now I'm doing community-based services. So I'll set up community engagement events for the juvenile office and for the youth academy. Right now I'm trying to get tickets to go watch one of the Springfield Cardinals game for the kids for an after-school program. Yeah, because we do work with a lot of higher risk, low socioeconomic kids, so that'll be one of the only times that they could probably go see a baseball game.
Gotcha.
So that's what I do more now, and I'm starting to work on divergent cases with Stacy.
And did you have to have a psychology degree? That's what I'm looking for. It's like, do you, because you're dealing on a psychological level with these kiddos, and you kind of have to be, thinking them all the time, like that would just be like constant.
Sure.
Because they had all this, I mean, they've probably become pretty good at some of the stuff that they try to pull off.
Yeah, I mean, and we definitely don't code ourselves as clinicians in any manner of trying to figure out what's going on psychologically with kids. Our office will accept degrees in several different areas of social services. So I personally have a degree in criminology and psychology. So I use my psych degree all the time now. But we absolutely have people that don't necessarily have specifically a psychology background, which is exactly why we have full-time clinicians that we basically can go to and say, hey, I'm seeing this behavior in this kiddo. Parents are telling me this is happening at home. What do you think we should be doing next? So.
Any of my remote people have questions? Everybody know where your juvenile detention center is? How far out do you guys cover? Just Greene County?
Yeah, we're just Greene
Okay,
County.
that was a stupid question, yeah. Okay, well, I was just thinking there was, so then, and the ages again?
You are a juvenile in the state of Missouri until your 17th birthday.
So what's the youngest juvenile that walks through your door?
Oh man, well, in diversion, I get really, really young kids because we have parents that will come in and want services for their kids. Probably the youngest that I have worked with a family on has been in the 4th grade. But generally, we don't get a whole lot on kids any younger than that. I would say kind of our average population is probably 11, 12.
Kind of junior high?
Yeah, definitely middle school, high school. But, actually when you were asking where all we do reach, it's not that bad of a question because there aren't detention facilities
Right,
in
and so
every
you will
county.
take people
Yeah.
from other counties.
Yeah, so in our
that's kind of what I
detention
was thinking,
facility,
yeah.
we have contracts that we house for other counties. But the services that kind of we provide are just for
Right.
Greene County.
So how many beds do you have in your detention center?
We have 24.
24, yeah, that was something, okay. What's the numbers at the end of the day? Okay. So then, how do I want to say this? See, I taught middle school for 13 years.
Okay.
I had 8th graders for 13 years. I got to where I could think just like an 8th grader. And you've been doing this for how long?
Collectively, I've been with the juvenile office about 5 years. And
Okay.
I've had lots of different
Okay,
jobs.
all right. So I guess, have you seen any changing trends in the last 2 or 3 years of, like 3 years ago, this was more or less the problem that junior high kids came in with, and now it's this, you know what I'm trying to say?
Sure. I definitely think that we're seeing a lot more bullying and harassment type cases. Our office really recently has also been seeing a lot more domestic violence cases. And with kids, those generally are within their home, so with their parents and siblings. We do every once in a while get one that's a romantic.
So when you're saying domestic violence, you're saying that the junior high kid is seeing mom and dad beat each other up?
No.
The
That
junior high kid is
hitting
beating mom and dad.
mom or
Okay, just for
yeah.
clarification. Okay. And so, why, where, when, I don't know how to say this without being judgmental. So where does a family get to where a child becomes so uncontrollable that they physically attack their parent?
And
I think that was a pretty good way of saying that.
there's a lot of reasons
Okay.
for that to take place. I mean, we see a lot of families where parents maybe aren't doing everything that they need to do to be the parent in that situation. And a lot of times, especially with older kids, you will see that parents haven't really even felt like they've needed to parent a lot. And then they kind of get a point where it turns into maybe, oh, the kid's a little bit bigger than me and they want to do what they want to do. And when they haven't established those boundaries up to that point, it makes it a lot more difficult for that parent to come in and do what they need to do. We also see that a lot with kids that have really high mental health needs. And sometimes parents don't recognize what's going on to get the kid the help that they really need. We also see it when there's substance abuse issues and, the kid may be under the influence of something that's causing that too.
So what I would take away from that, just as a personal kind of thing, is that parents don't want to parent.
It does happen.
Yeah. So then do you offer parenting classes?
We don't internally offer parenting classes, but we certainly would, get parents set up with parenting classes if they feel like that would be helpful. Sometimes even just having a fresh set of eyes on a case, and for sure the diversion unit, myself and my coworker can be on the phone with parents and just kind of offer maybe a different area of discipline or kind of helping them tweak something that they're trying with their kiddo. And can offer support that way too.
Okay.
How do you deal with bullying cases?
Man, bullying is tough.
Yeah, like the children's division lady that was here earlier, she said they can talk to both families, but they can't really do anything more. So I'm just curious because it's like you said, it's continuing to happen.
So it first of all is going to depend on the level of what's happening. I mean, we definitely see cases that it's, people on social media going back and forth, but we also see cases where maybe someone's coming up to their face and threatening them with violence face to face. So those cases are going to be really, really different in what we're going to do. But definitely talking to those kids and families, and sometimes even just making sure the kids understand that's a crime and they're breaking the law, because it's kind of surprising how often kids do not understand that you can't say to someone, I'm going to hurt you or I'm going to kill you or something. That's a crime. And so sometimes even just understanding that they can't do that and that the government says that they can't do that can really make a difference. We also have some programming that we can refer families to. So we can use something called the Victim Impact Panel. And that is where it's a group of kids go in and they have a panel of people who have been the victims of a crime. And they basically explain to that kid kind of how that impacted them. A lot of times they can even explain how it's impacted more than just them, but also in the community. And so sometimes that's really good because the kids don't have to confront their personal victim, so they can be a little bit more open-minded. We also can refer families to what's called victim offender mediation, to where if that victim and their family are on board, we can have them sit down and have a facilitated conversation together to try to work out some of those issues. But I also definitely think that our community is trying to reach out and figure out ways to deal with that in a more direct way too. Anything else?
Remote people, any questions about bullying? It's been my experience that a lot of times kids that bully their parents bully too.
Yeah, it's definitely
Not trying to stereotype, I mean, it's just been my experience when I was
Yeah.
teaching school, the
Mhm.
kids that wanted to be like that, when the
Yeah.
parents would come to parent-teacher conference,
Mhm.
it would be like, well, not my, it would
Mhm.
just gonna be.
So you're absolutely right. And it's definitely an additional challenge when parents are not only in denial, but justifying what their kids are doing to other kids. I mean, I get a lot of parents that kind of have this, well, you could say a lot more when I was a kid. And you're like, probably. Does that make it right? Is that what we're here to argue about?
Right.
Okay. So, I mean, yeah, parents are usually an additional challenge to services that we're trying to provide to kids. So, I mean, almost any situation that you bring up, there's absolutely going to be occasions where parents need work too. And that's definitely a struggle that our office sees. Of a lot of times you get parents that kind of want to hand you their kid, have them fixed, and take them back in 6 weeks.
Right.
But that's just not how it works. Because if you put that kid right back in the same environment, they're just going to continue.
Well, especially if the parents aren't gonna change
Mhm.
what's going on in that environment. 'Cause,
Yeah.
Terry said that that she sees kids that are bullies, usually parents that are bullies, not necessarily maybe that parent bullied on them.
Mhm.
And that's what we were talking earlier about mental health, that's all that child knows now, to deal with things.
Absolutely.
In a reactive way.
Mhm.
So then, do you see a difference in the number of kids that come related to single parent
Mhm.
families and, both parent, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, and we certainly see all different types of families. But when we were initially actually doing the ACE studies in our detention facility, that was actually the number one ACE that kids had, that they were coming from a single parent or at least divorced home, which just coming from a divorced home, you're still going to have some built-in instability, because a lot of times that means those kids are going to either have access to one parent more than the other, or they're going to be going back and forth between different homes, and mom and dad are both going to have yeah, I mean, mom and dad are going to have their own issues. They're going to have their own family dynamics. A lot of times when you get divorced households, it's really challenging because mom may feel like this is a really serious issue, and dad just thinks it's a kid being a kid. And so trying to figure out where the balance is in between those two people is a lot of work.
Sounds like you got a lot on your plate.
We're always busy.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you for coming.
Absolutely, yes,
You can
thank
tell
you for
Jamie that you can just, I don't need her anymore.
Okay. Oh, man, I will be back if I tell her that. I promise you that.
Yes, and so the different handouts, when I mailed that to you, be sure to print those off, the checklists, and yeah, she sent like 4 or 5 different, I think, things total. So, yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you guys very much.
Thanks.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Kind of rainy day makes me.
I know. And it's cold. I'm glad I was off yesterday. I'm glad I'm inside today. So, I wasn't trying to pick apart things, but, and I'm not trying to step on any toes, because I know we have lots of single parents and things like that, but, we have some friends, and he has started a foundation in Omaha called Greene, named Stephen Warren. He's from Springfield, a Kickapoo graduate. And can't remember what Greene stands for, but he played for the Green Bay Packers, I think, professional football and things like that. And so he has used his celebrity to call on friends to donate money to get a mentoring program started in Omaha. And he stopped by one day. I'm friends with his mom, and he stopped by one day. And I don't know who was more excited, Taylor, because she was there that day, or me. She was all about the sports thing, and I was just all about getting to meet Stephen. But that they concentrate on a certain area in Omaha, and they called it a such and so whatever, kind of like how we have Zone 1 here, you know, the Zone 1 initiative. Well, they have a whatever kind of neighborhood where, you know, truancy, single parent families, all of those kinds of things. Steve is African American, and so they concentrate on, especially, I think, mostly young African American boys, because there's a large majority in that area that do not have a positive male role model. And so they realized that, you know, when they started doing their studies, that when they start looking at the young black male in, you know, detention, you know, prison system and all of that, there was one thing that a lot of them had in common, and that was that they didn't have a strong, positive role model in their lives. And so that's kind of where his dream team comes in and fills in the gaps. And part of his team now are really some of the graduates of the Warren Academy that were able to get out of kind of those habits, I guess, for lack of a better term, and were able to receive scholarships, gone to college. Everybody that works for him has some sort of like a counseling degree or social worker degree or whatever, I mean, you know, and all of that kind of stuff. And so they have things after school, they do things during school, they target certain schools and things like that. And so in a way, that's kind of what some of this sounds like to me. I mean, you know, what I like about this particular, what they come and talk about is, you know, there's a problem. We all know there's a problem. And we can point fingers and blame a whole lot of things, okay? And like I said, you know, I had both parents. I'm lucky. My daughter has both parents. So not everybody has that. And that doesn't necessarily mean that kids are going to be perfect. So don't misunderstand me. But, you know, you have to look at certain things and really, really be honest and say, okay, so here's what we're seeing, and then try and meet the needs of those kids. And it doesn't make any difference. You know, I always like when people say, well, my kid would never, ever. And I'm like, you don't know what your kid would do, because I see them at school. And they do, okay? But, you know, the idea of keeping them busy when that's the troublemaking times, okay, is perfect.
Well, I like the statement, so why did you do that?
What's happened to you?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because why is such a, it corners, you know.
They may not know why.
Well, that's the standard answer. I don't know.
Yeah. So, you know, all of the activities that, you know, I said, because when you're busy, guess what? You don't have time to look for trouble, much less get in trouble. And then you start figuring out really what, you know, we talked about the hardwiring. You know, I said you can't fix it. I mean, you can't go back and rewire, but you can kind of learn. So these are positive, if you will, coping mechanisms or positive, you know, activities. I think that, yeah, and that's why their program is so good. Plus, Holden and Hosmer both, I think, have been really, really good judges to work with in regards, especially Hosmer here lately. Anytime anybody's ever in, I'll say, who's that? And it's Hosmer. And you can tell just by the way that they say his name that they think that he is very fair. I think he's got a strong hand, but I think he's very fair. And that's the other thing that a lot of kids that end up in this system, they haven't been dealt with fairly. Okay, and so, you know, that kind of goes back to when I had my groups of kids that nobody wanted in the applied science class. They made their own rules. Okay, and then we taped them up on the wall. And so when something happened, it'd be like, number 3. They'd start to argue and be like, no, number 3, number 4, whatever. You made the rules. I didn't. So, you know, hold you responsible for it.
We used to have art contests for students, and then whoever won, they got to display their art. And my daughter got to go to that, so she was, that was really something
Right.
special to her.
Art, music, you know, all sorts of things. And of course, that's what a lot of therapy groups do, you know, is art and music. The equine therapy is really, really good. So, and here again, you know, when you're riding horses, you're getting a lot of physical therapy because you have to, yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's building your core, muscles and all of that, which, you know, is making a better brain connection. So, I mean, it's not just for enjoyment. There's actually some learning and some brain changes that take place when you're doing those kinds of therapies as well. So anyway, would anybody's feelings be hurt if we called it a day today?
Sounds good to me.
So we can hurry up and get out there in that rain. So let's review just a minute, make for sure that I'm on the right page. We'll be in class next week, okay? And next week we will finish module 2, 3, and 4 of mental health, okay? And I will try and get all of I will get the PowerPoints from today. You've got the one from Jamie. I will get the others to you, and I will also forward you on all the mental health modules. And if you can, I would copy the mental health modules off, okay? Just so that you can put them in your binder, because I think they're a pretty good resource of information. You know, like I said, I'm make all my copies at work. Because some of those will add up. Of course, you can make them 2 to a page or 3 to a page, however you want to set up your PowerPoint thing, you know. But I think it's worth printing off and keeping for future reference. So next Wednesday then we'll be in class. I've got a few people that still have some support papers out. So let's try and get all that. I'm trying to, you know, get all that done. Then on the 9th, I will be gone to Kansas City for the curriculum, the community health worker curriculum thing. So that will be an online day. And those assignments, there aren't that many, because I can just remember from the last time, the last group of the 5th module didn't have that many activities to do. Okay, I think I've pretty well got everybody assigned to.
And, next time we meet, we also need to have our monthly.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I will need April numbers by next time. Okay. And then let me double check here. No, there isn't. So let's see. Okay. Yeah, okay. So I've got everybody down for the days. Okay, for presentations, just a little bit about the presentation, then we'll go. Remember, the presentation doesn't need to be any more than 10 minutes long. Okay. If you have handouts, please bring handouts. And scan me, or, you know, like scan me one or whatever, so that I can probably just scan it on everybody else. What I may do is just put it on the discussion board so that people can just, or in this, you know, in the announcement or whatever, that'd just be a good way. Then everybody gets to see it and you can download everything. And then we'll be done. And so if you, the other thing too was, you know, if you want your hypertension certification, your blood pressure certification, I need to sign off on that. So I figured Jordan Valley, if you work with Bob, just send me a sheet that's got all your names on it and his signature, that'll work. Okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll teach you how to do blood pressure.
You can, if you've got a nurse down there at Kimberling City, just practice a couple of times, and have her, you know that you know exactly how to do it. Amy, your group, you guys can figure some way out of doing that as well. Just send me, if you want to, just for your group, just send me a list of everybody who kind of checked off on being able to do blood pressure. And then that way you'll get your blood pressure, your little certification on that. And everybody will get, I can't remember that I have a separate little certificate for the diabetes, because we went through that. Like I said, it's very minimal to begin with, but there is one for the hypertension, an additional certificate that goes with that. So, okay. All right. See you next week, literally.
Yeah.
You guys want to do your blood pressure now? Because I have it.
I'm already signed off.
Oh, okay. Anybody else?
Rachel did mine.
Because I've got a,
I've got,
Well,
I
maybe we're-
took class, so I don't know, when I was taking medical assisting class, you
Yeah.
can get like certified, so I don't know.
well,